Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Thumbs up?
Yep.
Actually, I shouldn't have done this, should I? Because you might all think you just have to copy that even if you didn't hear me. So with my hands hidden, put one thumb up if you can hear me. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Now, look, we're starting a bit late. It's crazy. That's unusual for me. But what happened was I was on the phone with someone else, and it was this really important call, and I couldn't get off. But I thought I had lots of time left, so that was okay. But when I got off, things were a little bit tight, and I came up here and found the laptop had gone flat. So I ran around to find a power cord to plug it in, but my children had taken the power cords. And then I did find one power cord right in one girl's room and plugged it in, but the switch had blown on the circuit boards and I didn't notice that. So it wasn't actually charging anything. And then I was looking for the books, and unfortunately I'd put them in a box and my wife had put them back in the roof on the weekend to tidy up, and I have a whole lot of books to show you. So I had to run up to the roof, and I came back down in the lecture, the thing still hadn't charged, and so anyway, I worked out the switch was open and I shut the switch, and just like that, there was just like a million little things that happened, and every one of them is absolutely fine and normal, and you'd expect it to be fine and you could deal with it. But somehow the whole combination of them meant that I was like 5 minutes late, and that's really embarrassing. And what's really particularly embarrassing about it is that no individual one of those excuses is at all plausible. It somehow was the net collection of them all combining in this horrendous and unexpected and completely unusual way that made me late. Though actually now I think about it, I'm always a bit late. But I guess that's the universe out to get me and combining millions of things that are beyond my control. So let's get on with the lecture now. I just want to show you the slides. Let's see if that's going to work. Ba-ba-ba. I got the, I managed to, first time ever, get the editor working, and I put all the streams together from the lecture from last Wednesday and uploaded it to YouTube. And I've just been hit by a copyright strike within seconds of uploading it. Very annoying. Apparently, I put in some music from an opera singer. You might remember when that was. So I'm trying to work out how to deal with that. So let's go to the lecture slides. And I assume you can all see that. And we did sovereignty last week, and we talked lots about sovereignty. And now we're talking about errors. We're talking about errors. And the people that know the most about errors and have done the most research about errors are people in the safety business. So we're going to be looking at a lot of stuff from safety. There's safety science, a lot of safety scientists. There's lots of psychological research into safety. And there's actually a fair bit of research into human errors now too, the mistakes people make. For a while, it wasn't a real thing, but a couple of breakthrough people did work into this. And we'll be talking about one of them tonight. And the other one, Daniel Kahneman, I'm sure you probably all know already. Is a remarkable man. We won't directly be talking about his work tonight too, but that is really interesting to read as well. So errors, safety, security. Now let's first of all talk about the link, because you can go to a conference and it's full of safety scientists, or you can go to a conference and it's full of security engineers. I made that up. Remember, we're inventing security engineering. As far as I know, if you went to a conference full of security engineers, it'd just be you and me. But lots of people are security engineers. They probably just don't use that phrase. But I really do believe when in America, they use the phrase all the time, but it means it essentially just means cyber to them. But for me, security engineering, as we spoke about from the very first lecture, is a mindset which applies the ideas and principles of engineering to address security-related problems. And why we think that's an attractive and interesting thing to do is that engineering, which has been around for a while now, has proved quite good at working out ways that we can deal with uncertainty, complexity, likelihood of failure, human errors, imperfection in ingredients, and so on. And somehow we can assemble all those things into complex systems, and they still tend to work with a degree of assurance. And we tend to adopt good practice, and things tend to get better. If only all those things were true for security in the same way they've been true for bridges. So that's sort of our mission. So the link between safety science and security engineering, for me, is they're both interested in error. Human error is very interesting. we're both interested in things not going wrong. So safety science is often interested in high impact, low probability things. So what's the chance of an amusement park ride failing? Well, it's low, but if it did, it'd be a disaster. So that's sort of in the realm of safety science. I guess if accidents happen more often, it's not really, you don't need a science for it. That's just normal OH&S or just everyday observation. We really need the science when there's a long, there can be a long run without any accident, but we need to still somehow detect and deal with the risk that's building up invisibly but residually. And that's why we use scientific methods. And the safety science people are great, and there's good literature there, and I encourage you to read it. But don't ever be tricked into thinking that safety science is the same as security engineering. Can anyone think why? What's the difference between safety and security? Tom, you're outside. That's fantastic. I'm so jealous. Is that your house?
No, I'm down near a beach.
That's what I thought. It looked like you were outside. That's fantastic.
Yes, I'm enjoying my government-sanctioned exercise.
Well done. Well done. So yeah, any thoughts, anyone?
Someone posted in chat, I think.
Oh, did they? Oh, damn, I've got so many. Thanks, Tom. How do I find the chat? There's so many buttons. I push this button. More. There's a button that says more. Can someone direct me on their screen? What button do you push? Oh, I think maybe because I'm sharing, I'm not my screen view.
Do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, good, Tom. That'd be great.
Security involves taking account of others actively breaking what you're building.
Who said that?
Neil, I believe.
Neil, well done. Neil said some good things actually in lectures. Neil, yes, spot on. Designing against an adversary. We've got a malicious person actively seeking out weaknesses. Now notice, if we can be safe against a malicious person, then we're safe against random nature. Random nature isn't as bad as a malicious person, though sometimes, and it certainly felt like that this afternoon as I was racing for the lecture, random nature did seem to be a malicious adversary out to get me. But we tend to have very different discussions and talk about different things. We're really wondering how someone can zoom in and find a problem and the amount of energy they'll put into finding it. Whereas in safety, they have more confidence in averages, long runs, and statistics. Whereas that's irrelevant to us because 50% chance of doing something doesn't mean anything randomly if a bad guy will do it deliberately. Yes, Tom, sorry.
Yeah, don't security engineers have to have the adversary called Murphy?
Murphy, yeah, that's right. See, how powerful is Murphy is really the question. And I guess what I was saying there is I suspect Murphy is astonishingly powerful, but still not as powerful as the ultimate adversary that we all have facing us, who we should give a name to. What should we call the adversary?
APT.
APT. Or, yeah, look, I think my most advanced adversary out to get me is Richard Buckland. That guy, he gets me every time. Yeah, okay, let's try and think of a good name for the adversary. That's a good idea. So that's the difference between the two. Let me just close some of the windows I opened in my frantic search for chat. So they're not the same, but the things that help us with safety can help us with security. The solutions can mingle between them. So we should learn from them, but not be the same as them. But we should certainly invite each other to each other's conferences because my conference is very lonely and I'd like to go to their conference. And actually, I have been to some of their conferences. I've been to some aeronautical safety conferences, which I find incredible, so interesting. So I strongly suggest if you can ever sneak along to a conference, normally they'll let people in up the back, or if you're a student, you might even be able to wrangle a free entry. I would try and get to any conferences you find that are being held anywhere. The one I went to was a professional one run by the Royal Society of Aeronautics or Royal Aeronautical Society or something like that. But there'll be academic ones as well. Yeah, so definitely jump in and go along and hear and be amazed. And I heard once a person who was in charge of safety on oil rigs, who'd been an oil rig designer and safety person for a long time, talking about some of the disasters that he'd observed on oil rigs, not the one that we studied, but other ones more locally. And that also was overwhelming. And let me just say now, so I don't forget it, now that I'm thinking of it, the most interesting thing he said was he was talking about one disaster, and he was in charge of writing the report afterwards, trying to work out what had gone wrong and what could be learnt from it. And think he might have even had footage of this, or he'd reconstructed it from oral stories. But in my mind, he had footage and could actually see it. When the problem started, there was something like, gee, I wish I had a better memory, 300 alarms went off on that control panel. He said there were 300 flashing lights, 300 problems, 300 sirens. I don't know if they all had sirens, but lots of them had noise. And he said, of them all, like 6 were important. But in all that stressful environment, how could you expect the operator to spot the 6 most important ones when all the other ones are going off as well? Yeah, that was really compelling. As he was talking about it, I was trying to imagine myself in that situation. So we're going to start now by going through a sequence of amazing books, which you do not need to read and get for the exam, because the exam is going to be easy, but you do need to read and get them for your professional development and to be an awesome person. They are amazing books. The first book is, can you see it? Human Error by James Reason. He was the, I think, first guy to systematically study people making mistakes and why people make mistakes and how people make mistakes. He's a psychologist. And he did this funny thing. He talks about how he started a collection of errors. He just started keeping a little scrapbook, and whenever he made a silly error or noticed someone else making a silly error or read about a silly error in the newspaper, he just stuck it out, wrote it out, or clipped it out and stuck it in the book. And it was just a little side interest of his. And then at one point he sat down and looked through the book and suddenly thought, actually, there's an academic discipline here. There's something going on. And he then conducted research into the sorts of errors people make and why they make them. And he found all sorts of interesting things. And I've just tagged some of the ones that I think are very interesting. But you should definitely read this whole book. It is completely awesome. Right, the first one, the stress vulnerability hypothesis. Oh, I don't think I tagged that. So that is, it seemed that there was a high correlation. So an error is a sort of a cognitive failure. So you do something dumb. You mean to, what have I done that was dumb? Oh, I'll tell you the best error I ever made. I was driving, this is in the old days when I worked at Microsoft, in Microsoft Research, and they didn't really know what to do with researchers. So we were always thinking we were going to be sacked or something, or made to do commercial stuff, and then we'd have to leave. But for some reason, miraculously, they just kept giving us money to do all this pure research. It was so fantastic. But we were, again, always nervous about why they were actually doing it and if it was of any value to them at all. The 2 things I suggested to them were, well, actually the whole group suggested the first one to them. There were 3 of us, that they should investigate the internet because it was really awesome and a good way of everyone talking to each other. And we really, have I mentioned this to you before? And we argued and argued. We just couldn't get them interested in the internet. They love their own little protocols, NetBUI and things. There was one Microsoft machine that accessed the internet. Did I tell you this already? And I said I needed to get onto the internet. I said, okay. And they gave me a login on their firewall machine, the machine that was there. It was called Ingate, their gateway machine that also ran their firewall. So I actually had a user account on their firewall between Microsoft and the whole world. I've never checked to see if I still do. I doubt it. So that was crazy thing number 1. And crazy thing number 2, I tried to persuade them, was the importance of concurrency and parallel programming and doing things massively in parallel. You know, the sort of distributed stuff that let Google come into existence, the sort of stuff that Amazon does. And again, no one was interested. So there I was, going to this place that I thought wasn't really interested in anything I was interested in, slightly nervous, and I had a meeting with a bigwig. I can't remember who it was. Bill Gates did come there once, but I can't remember if it was that day. But you wouldn't believe it. I was running a little bit late, and I was driving in, and I thought, oh, this is going to look so terrible if I turn up late to this meeting. So I was driving in frantically, and it was at Ryde, and you had to go off the road. I guess it was Epping Road. I can't even remember the names of roads. And you had to sort of do a big U-turn underneath or across whatever the crossroad is, Lane Cove Road or something, and then head back up the other way. So you have to do this really tight U-turn and head straight back up. So I'm at the lights waiting to do the U-turn, and I'm thinking ahead, thinking, all right, what are the things I can optimize? So when I park there, I can just get there at maximum speed. And I thought, all right, well, I should pack my bag now. So I packed the bag on the seat next to me while I'm in it, so I don't have to do that once I stop. And my ID card, I should get that out and put that around my neck, so I'm ready to swipe that in. Oh, and when I get there, I'll park in this spot here, which is near the door, and I'll put the steering wheel lock on and And then I thought, oh, I'll put the steering wheel lock on now to save time. So I put the steering wheel lock on, and then the lights went green, and I accelerated off really quickly and tried to do the U-turn, but I had a steering wheel lock on, which doesn't let you turn. So it was just a dumb mistake I'd made. I was already in the future when I was planning, and I'd skipped the step where I actually had to drive to get there. That's an error. That's a human error. It's funny and ridiculous, and sometimes they are funny and ridiculous, and sometimes they're tragic. But humans do make these errors and do these failures. And so he tried to work out what the heck was going on and when do people do it. And he found a correlation between cognitive failure, that was cognitive failure, I'm embarrassed to admit, and your vulnerability to externally imposed stresses. Now, it's not clear, and in fact, he doubts if this is the case, that one causes the other. It's not clear that if you have more stresses happening on you at a given instant, you're more likely to make a mistake. He thinks possibly rather they're both correlated with the same sort of thing, the state of mind you're in or the sort of brain you have or something. But if you're more likely to be absent-minded, you're also almost certainly more likely to be vulnerable to externally imposed stresses. So he started studying this thing about how humans fail, and he sort of normalized the whole thing. So this book is about that. And suddenly it became acceptable, rather than imagining humans were perfect when you built a system, to realize, well, I've got the instruction manual for humans, and actually we're very flawed and make sort of mistakes all the time, and we should know about that and plan for that. So let me tell you some of the findings he's got, and you should definitely read the Daniel Kahneman books as well to find out more. In fact, there's a whole, if anyone's interested in human failure, I've got a whole shelf full of books on how humans fail and cognitive biases and just dumb things that we do and reasons why. I call it my mistakes psychology shelf. I'm very happy to lend anyone any books they want out of that. And it is very interesting and humbling to read and realize what a fallible ape we are. We think of ourselves as perfect brains in jars, don't we? But actually we're this imperfect, wet, sloshy, fallible, failing, constantly breaking machine with all sorts of imperfections. And I love it. The second thing to talk about was Chekhov's gun. So you might have heard of Chekhov's gun. It's this sort of trope that if you're watching a Chekhov play and there is on the set, it's just this fixed set, and on the set there is a gun on the wall as a decoration or something, then at some point in the play, someone's going to take that gun and use it. And most TV shows and cartoons have this, that if there's something there that's introduced, it's a bit unusual, it's sort of lazy writing, really. It's normally only there because someone needs it to be used later on. So if in a scene, the scene starts and you see a knife sitting on a desk, you know, that knife, someone's going to pick up that knife and use it. If there's a button that if you push it, the bomb will go off, someone's going to push that button. You know, all the things that are there are sort of needed to be there. And actually, because that trope is so unconsciously, you know, part of how we expect TV to be now, often you can create tension just by having an object there because now we expect that it will be used because that's what happens in TV land. But of course, if you came to my house and there was a knife on the table, no matter how much we zoomed in on it and paused longingly over it and I'm not going to stab you to death with it. But in movie land, it does. So here's, let me find his rule. Okay. So he's talking about here about the difficulty of finding countersigns. So when you're in a situation, you've got a mental model of what's going on, and there are things that you'll notice that support that model that make you think, aha, yeah, actually my mental model of what's going on is what's going on. And there's things which make you question that model called countersigns. And it turns out we're very bad at spotting countersigns. So if something's going on and you've got a mental model of what's going on, when you look around, you'll tend to notice the things that support the mental model and you'll tend not to notice the countersigns. Sometimes this is related to the notion of confirmation bias, I guess, that I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. So the volume of local state indications, so the number of signals around in a given situation, almost invariably exceeds the cognitive system's ability to apprehend them, to notice them. He's a psychologist. He's writing like a very brainy person. Only a limited number will receive adequate processing. So you look at some and not others. You pay attention to some and you don't pay attention to others. And the ones that you choose to devote processing to are most likely to match the conditional components of several. The ones you pay most attention to are the ones you're expecting to see, essentially, the ones that are consistent with the rules that you've currently got. Now, he's not just making this assertion. The lovely thing about this book and his research is that whenever he had a theory like this, then he carried out a whole lot of tests on people to see what the results would be. So you get to read a whole lot of amazing, interesting experiments as you go through this book. All right, number 2, encoding deficiencies in rules. Yep. So encoding is you forming a mental model. It's you having a way of thinking about a situation. So I know I used to find this really hard when I was young. I'd have a conversation with an adult if I was in trouble with the principal or something else, and I just somehow completely failed to realize what was going on. Or if I was asking someone on a date or something, or trying to work out if they liked me, I'd engage in a conversation, but I'd really not understand what was going on. And actually, my wife's really good at this now. And when we're in a situation, often we'll go away and she'll say, but you realize that person was actually cross with you. And when this happened, that was this. And you should have said that. And now you've said that, they're probably gone away. And I go, oh, really? I just had not formed that view of what was going on at all. And that this mental model that you form to understand how the world is going on, you are encoding, you are representing things that you think are important. So once you've learned a little bit of public speaking, you've probably started to learn about sign language and body language. And once you've done it a bit, every time you look at people now, you're probably able to read them quite well in terms of attention, boredom, happiness, revulsion, all that sort of stuff. Rowan, for example, is yawning. I can interpret that. Oh, that's an embarrassed smile. But you see, I can interpret that because I've got this sort of mental model of what state you're going through and what facial indications mean and so on. And what he was talking about here is he noticed this interesting phenomena that if your mental model of what's going on doesn't actually encode one thing at all, so there's something you're completely oblivious to, then you can't respond to it. And the experiment he did was on little kids, which are always the most fun experiments to do. Certain properties of the problem space are not encoded at all. Siegler found that 5-year-old children consistently fail at balance beam problems. That's things where you've got a beam and a little pivot in the middle and you put weights on them. They consistently fail because, and you can probably imagine why they're going to fail. What are they going to get wrong? Oh no, I can hear ticking. It's a bomb.
You have to put things on both ends.
Yeah, put things on both ends. Kev, was that you, Kev?
Yeah.
Thank you. You are a hero coming to my aid like that. That is not exactly the answer I was looking for, but I'm happier even than if it was, because that was just a really nice thing to do. Yeah, look, if you balance things, it's absolutely, there's got to be things on both sides. But the important thing is the contribution an object makes to the whole balancing equation is how far it is away from the fulcrum. And the kids just don't get that when they're really young. They just think you've got to have the same weight on both sides, and the distance thing doesn't come into it. And this guy Siegler did an experiment where he even drew, they appeared to be unaware of the significance of the distance of a weight from the fulcrum. And this continued even after they'd received training designed to focus their attention upon the distance factor. On the other hand, 8-year-olds got it straight away. So the thing was, they weren't seeing it was a relevant thing, so they weren't encoding it. So when they were trying to understand the situation of the scales, it was a complete mystery to them and they couldn't even see. And this is another human error. If there's something you're not even noticing, you're not even seeing, it's not part of your mental model of what's going on, then you have no chance of incorporating that into making sensible decisions and so on. And I'm not going to read the whole book. I just want to give you some examples, merely to give you a flavor of what the book is about and the sorts of flaws he found in people. But actually, you really need to do the hard yards and read the whole book and be amazed and underline every second word like I have here. The next one was, where are we up to here? Hindsight bias. Oh, I want to... Okay. Oh, well, there's another one that I haven't listed in. So if you've formed a plan and you're carrying out that plan and you think it's the right plan to deal with a given situation and it's not the right plan, and evidence starts gathering that you're doing the wrong things and going, like for a virus, okay, let's think of COVID. What if we decided to not have anyone self-distancing? We thought we'd build herd immunity and things like that. Or what if we decided we want everyone to completely self-distance, but children could still go to school? So yeah, let's pick that last one. Everyone should self-isolate, but children should still go to school because we've got this mental model that children don't transmit it very much. And the danger of children being at home is worse to all the adults at home because it gives them all this stress and high blood pressure, and it's just safer for the whole world for children to be there and so on. And you had this mental model of what's going to happen and you try it out. Well, after a week or two, you'll start to get data. You'll start to see if it's working or not, if the children are starting to get it. Okay. So you've got this plan. He's done some interesting research into when people are able to revise their plan in the face of evidence that shows the plan isn't working. And let me just see. Overconfidence. This is 6.5. Actually, I'll read the whole thing. Problem solvers and planners are likely to be overconfident in evaluating the correctness of their knowledge. They will tend to justify their chosen course of action. Skipping all the reference. That's Corriat, Lichtenstein, and Fischelhoff, 1980. They will tend to justify their chosen course of action by focusing on evidence that favors it and by disregarding contradictory signs, confirmation bias. This tendency is further compounded by the confirmation bias exerted by the completed plan of action. So having a plan of action encourages you towards more confirmation bias. A plan is not only a set of directions for later action, it's also, although you don't realize it at the time, a theory concerning the future state of the world. It confers order and it reduces anxiety. And as such, it strongly resists change, even in the face of fresh information that clearly indicates that the planned actions are unlikely to achieve their objective or that the objective itself is unrealistic. The resistance of the completed plan to modification or abandonment is likely to be greatest under the following conditions. And this is the magic thing to know. So here are things that will make it hard for you to give up on a plan that you've decided is giving you comfort. And I'm not going to read out all the reference, but these are supported by references. A, when the plan is very elaborate, involving detailed intermeshing of several different action sequences. So if you've got an elaborate plan, you won't want to change or abandon it. When the plan was a product of considerable labor and emotional investment. Now, we all know this one, don't we? And when its completion was associated with a marked reduction in tension or anxiety. So it's easy to spot flaws in others. So let me tell you the flaws of my children. I have noticed that if they are stressed about a university essay and then they complete the essay and they finish it, then they're suddenly, phew, it all seems under control. And then sometimes they show it to me and they say, hey, Dad, do you want to make some comments on my essay? And I've sometimes foolishly said yes, because if I make any comments, I receive such a wall of anger because they don't want to change the essay. When they say, do you want to look at it, Dad, and make suggestions? What they're really saying, what I should have encoded, I'm sure my wife would understand this, is, can you look at this and tell me it's really awesome, Dad? But so if I look at it and say, oh, this should change, or this should change, or this should change, they're very resistant because they've put vast amounts of effort into making the thing they've shown me and they don't want to change it. And it's really reassured them when they've finished it and they're feeling happy, and I'm making them uncomfortable again now. So I'm only making comments about my children because it's very hard to see the flaws that I have. I suspect I don't have any at all. Probably just, I don't know where they would have got theirs from, probably their mum. Okay, problems with causality. Look, there's all sorts of other really amazing ones, but I won't go through them all because I basically just want to say you should get this book. You should read this book. It is very good. Human Error, James Reason. I love his surname. He's written lots and lots of books, by the way. I'll mention one other one briefly at the end. The others are more accessible. So he sort of became famous when he published this. He sort of created the world of studying human error. And as a result, people like, actually, no, I might be mixing him up with someone else. I was going to say that Malcolm Gladwell did a write-up of him and made him famous. But actually, I think Malcolm Gladwell did a write-up of someone else. So I'm talking rubbish. But nonetheless, he became very famous, and he, as a result of that, wrote lots of popular books, which are less written in that highfalutin language with references and more just accessible. I actually found this book more useful, but it was harder going. But gee, it was interesting. But the other books are probably a nice intro and to get you excited if you wanted to read some of his other books. They're very good. Just about all available on Amazon. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk, I was going to talk about hindsight bias. Let me just, I won't go back to the book. I'll just tell you about it directly. There's this thing that after something's happened, we go back and we reconstruct what we thought and what we did to make what happened seem more inevitable and our role in it more more profound. So if you heard my reconstruction of my response to the COVID virus, that was painting what happened as inevitable and my response as being really wise and rational. And probably I'm just exhibiting hindsight bias here. And it is often, sometimes in sport, it's called Monday's football or something. Isn't it Monday Football Heroes? I know Paul Kelly sings a song about it. But basically, after the game, everyone can talk about what was obvious and what everyone should have done. And I often feel sorry for political leaders like, who was that guy that flew over to Hitler? Chamberlain. The way we learn about him in history is such an idiot, and it was so obvious what he should have done. But at the time, it probably wasn't. And maybe if what he'd done had worked, and maybe in alternate parallel universes where Hitler wasn't such an incredibly hard to understand human being, but more like a normal human being, who knows, maybe it would have worked there. It's hard to know. But in hindsight now, what happened. And although Chamberlain couldn't have known it, we all think he's terrible and contributed disastrously to it. And the same way that Trump, we're all making fun of him, not making fun, but watching in horror at his treatment of the COVID virus and the way he's preparing America. But, it could be that in some other worlds, the virus hadn't gone like that and it had just been a small thing and it did just go away like he sort of predicted it would, just magically one day would wake up and it'd go away. And in those worlds, maybe he would have gone around saying, yeah, it was really obvious. And he would have done the same thing that we're now doing when we're criticizing him. So hindsight bias is dangerous because the problem with hindsight bias is you then ascribe meaning and reasons to the causes of events. And you think they're sort of inevitably caused by the things that were happening around that time, whether or not those things were actual contributions. And so when you're writing a report, this is the point of this whole story, when something's happened and you're looking back on it and writing a report like we ask you to do in every case study, and you're saying, oh, here's what we should have done differently, here were the problems, here were the challenges, and so on. It's very easy to construct a false view of what happened then and miss the actual reality. And we like doing that. Sometimes that's called the illusion of control, that we understand what's going on and that we have agency and that we can control it. And sometimes we've missed the very factors. We haven't coded them at all that were the critical factors. For example, the Challenger disaster. Now, you guys are all too young to remember it, or most of you are, but I remember this. It was a very, very sad thing that the space shuttle Challenger exploded and killed everyone on board in a really visible way. And when I was in in Washington a year or two ago, I'd never gone to Washington before. The thing I wanted to do more than anything, two things I wanted to do more than anything, or three. One was I wanted to go to the Aerospace Museum. They have there, the Smithsonian Aerospace Museum, and I got to see Soviet perishing. I don't know how to pronounce it. The nuclear missile. They have some there, and you get to see the actual lunar land. No, you don't get to see the lunar landing module because I assume that was jettisoned somewhere or something. But you get to see the spare they built. So an equivalent, the same. And you get to see bits of the re-entry module and the heat shield that burnt up. And you get to see actual things from actual history. It's quite amazing. The second thing I really wanted to see was the Lincoln Memorial. But the third thing I wanted to see was I went to Arlington, the military cemetery, and I went and found the place where they'd erected the grave in memorial of the people that died in both the Challenger and the Columbia. And it was very moving for me. I'd heard so much about it and often imagined what it would be like to be them. And I'm so angry, I guess, with NASA about the whole thing. And it's occupied so much of my thinking over the years to actually see the graves and remember that they were real people. One of them was a teacher, a primary school teacher. She was going up with messages of hope from her kids so they could see that teachers, can. Anyway, it was very, 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 very moving. I'm really glad I got to see it. So the Challenger disaster was a disaster, and it is something that everyone should know about. Here's the relevance to the last thing I was talking about with hindsight bias. After the disaster, the president, there were lots of investigations, but the main one was the president formed a commission. I'm pretty sure. Suddenly I've gone blank. I'm pretty sure it was a presidential commission to investigate it. And on the commission, in a stroke of amazing brilliance, they put the man who I probably love as much as I love anyone in the whole world, my complete hero, Richard Feynman, most amazing physicist and human being and teacher, who should have won the Nobel Prize twice or three times, but at least twice he should have won, but he only won it once. What an amazing man. So anyone that doesn't know about Richard Feynman should find out all about him. Hysterically funny, hysterically brilliant. He did a whole lot of early security research, actually, just for fun, which inspired me to pick up lockpicking long before I even thought about security. He could crack safes and pick locks, and he played the bongos. He was just this amazing man that whenever he learned anything, he did it so well. He was awesome at social engineering. He was the guy, and I know I'm rambling now, but I like him so much, but I'm going to safely move back to content in a second. This is non-examinable, but he's the guy that I think I mentioned to you that when he was at Los Alamos working on the bomb around the Second World War, and all that censoring was going on, and he was the one that got the jigsaw puzzle and wrote the message to his wife on the back of the puzzle and sent it to her. And also once he found a hole in the fence, and I did this once, not knowing that I was following in his footsteps when I was in high school. He found a hole in the chain link fence. There was super high security. He had to go through all these millions of protocols and get signed in past the guard to get in. But he found a hole in the fence that could let you just run out into the desert. So what he'd do is he'd sign in, and then he runs to the hole, go out, come back around and sign in again, and then run to the hole and come. And he kept doing it until they noticed that something odd was going on, that he kept signing in without signing out. And I did that in an English classroom once when I discovered the window was open and the teacher was standing outside the door. And he is an amazing man, and they put him on the investigation. And then everyone else in the investigation wrote a report saying, this is what happened, these are the reasons, this is the explanation. And I guess in a normal course of events, we'd have said, well, that's the truth, and now we understand this event, and I'd have lectured you ad nauseum about all the profound things I found about the accident and all the things we could learn from it. But Feynman, bless his heart, did his own investigation, and he came up with a different opinion. He produced a minority report, and his report shocked the world. It was amazing. He did it at a press conference, actually. Everyone was saying, blame a scapegoat, essentially. And he was trying to tell everyone the disaster was because of the O-ring, the sealing, the ring that sealed the two tanks. For various reasons, they used liquid fuel rather than solid fuel. Unfortunate financial, political reasons. Solid fuel is much safer. Liquid fuel, of course, can leak. So high-pressured liquid fuel and high-pressure liquid oxygen. And the danger then is you've got this leaky problem. And then for political reasons, when they built the vessel at the launching thingy, the rocket that launched the whole thing, one of the politicians, I don't know the full story, managed to get the appropriation bill passed in such a way that it had to be assembled in his state. So a firm that lived in his state got to do the assembly. So jobs for the boys, or for my constituents. And the problem was then the thing was too long to be able to be transported between the states. It wouldn't go through some tunnel or some corner or something. So they had to cut it into two. And that's fine, they said. We'll cut it into two. We'll assemble it in two parts. We'll carry each of the parts across separately. And then when we get to wherever we launch it from, Canaveral or wherever, I can't really remember, we'll stick it together again, and we'll put a big O-ring between the two to seal it. And you can see cutaways of the O-ring and the mechanism they use to stop. You've probably seen O-rings before, but basically when you join two hard, rigid surfaces and you've got fluid around and you want to have an airtight joint or a fluid-tight joint, the rubbery ring, is jammed between the two hard things, and it fills all the available spaces. So even if the two pieces of metal aren't perfectly aligned, because they never can be, you don't get microscopic little cracks and leaks because the rubber is very forgiving and flexible and expands to fill all the places when you jam the two things together. But anyway, they'd had a whole lot of problems with the O-rings in the past on launching the Challenger, and when it came back, there'd been evidence of burns on the outside around where the O-rings were, suggesting that fuel had leaked out and it had caught fire, and there'd been issues, but they figured it was okay, that it didn't look serious, and so but Feynman was sure that the problem was the O-rings, and he was sure that it was because they had launched at low temperature, and the O-ring is more brittle, is less able to do its squishy job of filling all available cracks if it's cold. And he said that was a disastrous thing. And in fact, actually, if you read into it a little bit, I'll just tell you about the next book, The Challenger Launch Decision. This was one of my favorite books of last year. It nearly was my very favorite book of last year. I read it last year. It's been around for a while. Diane Vaughan, it's a new edition out. She wrote this book researching the decision that NASA went through to decide whether to launch or not. because on that morning, everyone was worried about it being cold, and the manufacturers and the engineers and everyone was saying we should cancel the launch, we shouldn't launch. And the NASA people were saying, no, the high-ups were saying we should launch. It's been embarrassing. We've not launched several times in the past. The press is making fun of us. NASA and the space race isn't seen as important to anyone anymore. It's really bad publicity to keep delaying it. We don't want to delay this launch. And I think one of the presidents, whoever was president at the time, really wanted it launched, and maybe I can't remember why. There was all these external pressures that had nothing to do with safety and so you can follow the book, the conversations that went backwards and forwards, and then the ultimate decision to launch and kill all these people. So Feynman figured it was the O-ring and wanted to draw attention to that. No one was paying attention to him. So at the press conference, if I've got it right, I'm pretty sure he just had a glass of cold water. Maybe they were all drinking cold water. And he suddenly, when everyone was talking about it, produced the O-ring and said, here's an example of an O-ring. And then he stuck it in the water, and then he banged it on the table, and you could see it was brittle and didn't bend. And it was so compelling. And all the newspapers covered it, and everyone's going, whoa, whoa, what a great report, la, 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 la. And even though it was a minority report, he got to be accepted. Now, his report you should read. It is an amazing document. If you read some of the books about his life, like what is it, Mr. Feynman? Something Mr. Feynman.
I believe it's Surely You're
Joking.
Thank you. Everyone rushes to say, thank you. Such a good book. Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. And he wrote another one as well. In fact, he's written several. And you can see some of his YouTube, some of his stuff was recorded and has made its way to YouTube, and it's inspiring to watch. In that book, he talks about the process he went through when he wrote that report. But in summary, he asked everyone what they thought the chance of a failure on launch was. What was the chance of a space shuttle exploding and someone being killed on launch? And the NASA official line and the official documents he got from NASA were 1 in a million or something like that. I'm not very good at remembering numbers, but it was that order of magnitude. 1 in a million. And then he said, how did you get that number? And they couldn't really tell him how they got the number, but they were sure that was the right number. So he went to the next level down and asked the middle management people and the people that had assembled the data and things. And he asked them, what was your honest estimate? What do you reckon the chance of an accident on launch is, a disastrous accident? And they said, oh, I don't know, 1 in 100,000. And then he went down and asked the next level. And he finally came down and asked the engineers and the technicians who built it and the guys who installed it and the guys who did the actual launch, guys and girls who did the actual launch. And their estimate was something like 1 in 100. And he said, how can we have this figure of 1 in a million with no evidence to back it up? People are just pulling these figures out of nowhere. And how can it be that the lower down you get, the higher the figure is? But the upwards people have no idea. And this is an organizational problem. You probably know that bad news never travels up. Everyone covers their butt or doesn't want to pass on bad news to their boss. It might get them in trouble. So everyone tells up what they think the people up want to hear. So the guys at the top or girls have probably no way of knowing what the actual data is. And so you probably know my approach to this sort of thing is always, if I was ever in charge of anything, I'd want to connect with the people on the bottom all the time. And recently, I managed to pull off this really awesome thing. The vice chancellor who makes all these decisions about students, but it's very hard for him to ever see students because he's right at the top. And how would bad news ever get to him? Because he's so far removed from everyone. So we managed to persuade him to come along to some classes, and he sat in on classes, and he was a student for the day, and he caught the tram into uni, and he did all these things. And the point of doing that is, it's like in the old fables, the medieval stories and things like that, the sultan or the wise king or ruler would dress in the clothes of the peasants and sneak out of the palace at night and wander around the city and hear what people actually thought and observe what people actually saw, because his courtiers and lords and the chief chancellor and various people won't ever tell him the truth, of course. They'll tell him what he wants to hear. So he went out to find. And that's what Feynman did. And that is why I love him, or one of the reasons, that instead of just believing what people told him, he was a true engineer. And he went, although he's a scientist, not an engineer, but I'm making him an honorary engineer. He went out and he found actual raw data and found what actually happened. Okay, so The Challenger Launch Decision is a great book. Let me just read you a small fragment of it. In 1992, after 6 years analyzing the history of the launch decision and all the launch decision making in the years before the Challenger launch, and I should say, she did this thing that James Reason did and that every researcher always does, which is she set out to do this little thing. She thought she'd just do a little investigation into the Challenger and why they launched. And it became an obsession, and it was her whole thing. And the same with James Reason and his interest in accidents. And you'll find this if you ever do research yourself. You think you're going to research one thing, one big grand thing, and you start researching it. And along the way, there's this little problem you have to solve. And you get a little bit interested in that problem, and you pay a bit more attention to it and a bit more attention. And suddenly that's your whole research. And all you're doing is becoming the world expert on this little problem. But that's important because no one's ever really understood that little problem before. And you always have this idea that you'll solve the big grand problem. But actually, we don't need a solution to the big grand problem. We need to have solutions to all the little bits. That's the important stuff. And then you can just assemble them to solve the big problem. So in 1992, after 6 years analyzing the history of launch decision-making in the years before the Challenger launch, I'd found no evidence of rule violation and misconduct by individuals. No evidence that people had broken the rules. No evidence that people had done bad things. Instead, the key to accepting risk in the past was what I called the normalization of deviance. So they had accepted these dangerous things like launch in the cold when you shouldn't, below the tolerance of the machine, because what they'd done was they had standards when the thing was originally made, and the manufacturers had said, you should never launch when it's below this temperature. And they'd launched slightly below that temperature a few times and nothing had gone wrong. So that deviance had become normalized, and they'd started thinking, that's okay. So next time they did it at a bit lower and a bit lower and a bit lower. Now we, understanding risk, know that when you take a risk, the risk not catching you out is nothing to do with your cleverness or your model of the world or your correct, accurate estimation of the risk. It's to do with luck. You just tossed the dice and you were lucky. But they were turning all that long run of luck every time they launched in a deviant condition and it didn't go wrong. They just turned that into fact. They said, well, it's safe to launch because nothing's ever gone wrong, so we can do it again. And so the deviation slowly increased over time. She had 3 reasons to explain it. Having the normalization of deviance, having accepted the anomalous O-ring performance once, so the O-rings had started to play up, started to leak, but everyone said it's okay, and they kept launching and the ship kept not exploding. The precedent became the basis for accepting it again and again. The normalization of deviance was a product of NASA's organizational system. Okay. What was shocking to her, and this is what she talks about in the preface to the new edition, which is why I wanted to get this edition, the Columbia, an accident which happened 15, 17 years later, the same thing had happened. That was the one where the insulation had broken off and taking off, hit something and caused damage. Again, people died, everyone died. That had been happening, but it had been accepted because they'd got away with it. And they thought, well, that's okay. They're just little bits of foam insulation breaking off. It's not causing any problem. So she found the shocking thing, not that people hadn't understood what happened the first time, but people hadn't changed and it was able to happen again. And what had been protecting them in the meantime wasn't some sort of organizational change or an appropriate new safety culture or security culture. What was protecting them in the meantime was the roulette wheel had just paid off every time. Just luck was protecting them. Okay, I won't talk any more about this book, except to say, awesome book. You should definitely read it. Gee, it's a bit of a book club today, isn't it? Let's just pause for a sec because I've got 3 more books, but they're awesome. Does anyone want to say anything? Let's just have a pause because I noticed the best thing about the last lecture, what I really liked, for those that left early, you should make sure you watch the video recording when I get past the copyright strike, was the discussion we had at the end. So everyone, and you know who I'm talking about, told us an awesome story about his experiences. And who else? Someone else told a fantastic story about being in Tokyo. Who was that? Who told that story? Oh, suddenly gone blank. Are you here? The Tokyo earthquake story. Anyway, people started sharing things. It was quite amazing. It was more interesting than things I was talking about.
I think it was a visit.
It was Abby. That's right. Thank you. I'm pretty sure it was. Was it you, Abby? Are you there? Okay. So does anyone have anything to say? Has anyone ever made silly mistakes? Has anyone ever normalized them? Has anyone ever had cognitive biases? Has anyone ever had a plan that they haven't wanted to abandon in spite of growing evidence that it was wrong? Or noticed this in other people, which is probably easier?
I do have something that you talked about earlier. It could be about I exactly don't know what it's about, but just like when your children show you the essay and ask for your feedback, and you make like heaps of feedback, heaps of comment, and they have to, like, if they go by your suggestion, then they're gonna have to change the whole thing. So this thing often happens when I show something to my brother, and all of the times I just tend to like finish my things and not asking for feedback, because especially if I'm like closer to the deadline, and if I show something to him, then he's gonna make me change everything. So that's something I do.
That is really funny, and it's funny that you're aware of it, and you were aware of it already before tonight. It sounds, yeah, that's really observant of you.
There's a really good book. There's a really good talk that I saw. I think I posted it in chat earlier, but it's by a safety engineer, and he talks about two really interesting incidents. One of which is the collapse of I think it's like a basketball stadium somewhere in the US, and there's another one about these firefighters fighting the massive fire. And the one about the firefighters is particularly interesting, with like confirmation and bias and stuff like that. One thing that stuck with me was the fact that like they were with their they were surrounded by fire. They had to run up the hill to try and get out of the way of the fire effectively to this like rocky area. And they don't drop their tools usually, because obviously you need them, but they got to the point where they were running slower than the fire was moving. So they said, we need to drop our tools. And the leader said this, but nobody did. No. And a lot of those people died because they were held back by these massive, massive tools. And so afterwards they did this research into it, and they said something to the effect of, that we need to train firefighters and show them when your tools are on, you run slower than when you run without, because people were so used to being firefighters that part of that was having the tools. Yeah. That when they needed to abandon them, it didn't seem like they were being firefighters anymore, and it didn't occur to them. But what happened was, if you trained them that now dropping your tools was part of their tool set, they would do it and be more effective because of it.
That's brilliant. I'm going to watch that talk. That is so true. We will, at the end of this, as long as I don't get too excited talking about all these books, talk about how to bring about culture change. Because once we know about safety and the ideas of safety, we have to then create a culture, which, because safety is something that belongs to the whole organization. It's not nothing that one person can do. So how do you change culture? And what you're talking, and the hardest thing to change is identity. People are very resistant to anything that changes their identity. So if their identity is wrapped up in carrying their tools, it makes complete sense to me. It'd be like when they tell you to evacuate the plane and don't take your phones with you. I bet everyone would take their phones with them. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Tom. That's a really good one. And I was thinking how you'd persuade them. The teacher in me was thinking, how would you train these firefighters so that they believed it? And I remember I saw once at a museum, a science museum, they had a series of lights on the floor, stretching out over the floor, and a big, enormous statue of a, or cardboard cutout, but huge scale size, I guess, of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And what you would do is you would stand there at the start, and that you would have a head start of a certain number of seconds, and you had to get away from it. And as it ran after you, in theory, the cardboard cutout stayed still, but the lights on the floor lit up at the speed that it was moving, so you could see it. And if it got to you before you got to the end, it went bop, bop, and it is so amazing. And the place was just full of kids running as fast as they could. Bop, bop. You just couldn't outrace it. So I reckon I'd be tempted to do that. Have some sort of thing like that where you can run with your gear on, and it goes, bum, bum, you know, the fire is moving at this speed. Can you escape it? Yeah, sure. I reckon I can. And just be told over and over again, you can't. It's very confronting. So after doing that, the real thing I learned was that I could not outrun a Tyrannosaurus Rex no matter how hard I tried. And that's you know, an important piece of information that I now know.
You don't need to outrun the Tyrannosaurus Rex. You just need to outrun the slowest person.
And isn't the trick that they can't turn? So you just got to change directions because they're so big and heavy. They just go in a straight line.
Oh, that's fantastic. Or I think they can turn to the left, but not to the right. I don't think they're ambi-turners. Is that it?
That's wacky.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, just separate topic, there's a great discussion in the chat here requesting that we put up a page on the with the blogs where you put your favorite books and things and podcasts and whatnot, so that we can go back and reference it later.
Yeah.
Like similar to the uni at home, but like, I don't know, book club page or something.
Good. Someone did ask me to create a list on Goodreads or somewhere like that. And I thought it was a good idea at the time, and I've just never done it. I will do that. And then maybe you can remind me of ones that we've missed. And maybe you can all suggest your own, because I love reading books so much. I do have this thing with my students. I don't know if I've ever mentioned it to you. Normally it's just my senior students, but let me tell all of you guys, because I feel we're a bit more intimate than normal for this course, where if I ever find a really good book, sometimes I'll just mail it to my former students that I really like and know, just anonymously. And sometimes in my letterbox, books just turn up to me, random books. And this year I've had a couple of amazing ones just turn up, just people I've taught in the past, or sometimes people on YouTube that watch some of the old videos we did and things. They somehow managed to work out my address, scary, and send me books. And I've got some fantastic books. And the one I got this year, did I mention it already, was the one about the discovery of rocket fuel and the development of rocket fuel. Such an amazing book. But and unexpected. Who would think that would be an interesting book? Oh, and another book about incredible book I'm reading at the moment about iron and blood. I think it's a precursor to the Jared Diamond book. But anyway, amazing books that people just send me. So by all means, you don't have to send me a book. If you just make a recommendation, that'd be fantastic. And then I could read it. And I'm very happy to recommend all these books. And I will create a list. And is a Goodreads list a good idea? Or is there, Oliver, you tell me, what's the most efficient use of our time?
For books, Goodreads works. I don't know. I use it for fiction, keep track of what novels I've read, but like you can't do podcasts and other things. So I suppose others might have better suggestions in that department.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Can't do podcasts. All right, we'll do something. Anyone with good suggestions, post it on the Uni at Home page, and I'll check it out tomorrow morning and see everyone's thoughts. Or in the comments now, and I'll check them out.
We might be able to run sort of like a Twitter page or something, like a Twitter thread, where everyone can just like comment down the recommendations.
I can make a post on @comp6441 that people can reply to.
That would be good, yeah.
Then I'll do that now.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. I know I should get back on. Just it took so much of my time, but I will. All right. Thanks, Jess. Good idea. And thank you, Gaurav. That was great too, your suggestion. Did anyone else have anything? There were some good comments. Anything else anyone was thinking of while I was talking that would be useful to share? No, I thought you were going to say something there for a sec, Brandon. No, good reaction. Yeah. No, just because your mic went off mute.
Oh, sorry, no, because my internet disconnected and I'm back. Very sorry, guys.
I just tweeted, by the way, so people can reply.
Good man. Thank you, Tom. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to say was just following on from what I think it was what Gaurav was saying, that your brother, you ask him for comments, but you don't really want them. I used to find that when we were teaching unit testing to students. I'd get them to write unit tests for their code. Lyria, a unit test is something you write when we have this new way of writing programs at the moment. We're sort of acknowledging that they're always wrong, and you should write tests to check when they're wrong. And the tests should be automated in some way. So if you change the code that you've so carefully written and tested, you should be able to just push a button and it runs all the previous tests you've ever done against it too. So if you were confident before, you're still confident. It's not as though changing it's going to break everything, because that's the danger in computing. And we call those tests unit tests because they're just little, and the whole sequence of them, they're individually called unit tests. And it's so important now in programming that it's sort of essential. You actually often write the unit tests even before you write the code, which is quite nice, high priority. And I was about a decade ago, more, trying to teach students how to write unit tests and the importance of writing unit tests, novice programmers. And I found everyone was hopeless at writing unit tests because no one ever wanted to write a test that showed that their program was crap. And I told them test their programs carefully, and I could watch them in the labs doing it, and they'd write one or two really lame tests, and they'd make a change to the code, and then they'd nervously go up and run the test and run the test. It worked, yay, and step away. They were just not wanting it to show a mistake. And the only way I could solve that problem eventually of teaching them how to write good tests. Have I talked about this already before? No. I have, Ian? No. Was I had this brilliant idea that I probably stole from a student who suggested at the end of the course the first time we did it, which is I got them to write tests for each other's code. And everyone's very good at finding faults in others' code. And I even told them for reassurance I'd never run their own tests against their own code. I'd just run on everyone else's code. And if they wrote a good unit test that found flaws in other people's code, they were doing a good thing. And I made it visible when your test found a flaw in someone else's code. Gee, everyone put a lot of effort into writing good tests then. So it's exactly this thing we're talking about. We really don't want to ever find problems in our own stuff. So challenge a launch decision about O-rings, her assumptions wrong, organizational culture, normalization of deviance. Okay, these were her three biggies. Her initial assumptions were, and the initial way the investigation went was, you might imagine it, is human error. Everyone's always very tempted to say this is down to human error. So you have a report and you find that it was someone's error, and that person is the official scapegoat. And we have this very simplistic way. We like a story as humans. So instead of seeing it as a complex menage of a whole lot of things all mixed together, we like to have a simple villain and a good guy and a bad guy. So after investigations, often, if they're done by people that aren't very good at doing investigations, just identify a bad guy and everyone villainizes them and the press talks about them. And the new world order now is that everyone, when they understand this, yeah, Hitler was bad, or yeah, Chamberlain was bad, or yeah. And we just have this very simplified version. But actually, it's rarely the case that it is a human error. We'll see in a second. I'm just trying to remember how many people saw the China Syndrome with us last week. I'm hoping most of you have seen it already since then. And if you haven't, please do make sure you do. It is, anyone that's seen it, what do you think? It was good, worth seeing?
There was less nuclear than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Like, it was not particularly nuclear-y.
No, it wasn't nuclear-y at all. The nuclear stuff was just what you'd almost call a MacGuffin. It was about human nature, human error, organizational failure. Yeah, that's a really good observation. I never thought of that before, Oliver. You expected a whole lot of nuclear gobbledygook and all that sort of stuff.
Well, yeah, I'm also at the same time as doing this course doing Introduction to Nuclear Engineering, and so they actually mentioned it in both courses, and so I was watching it, trying to like with two lenses at the same time.
What did you think?
Well, I didn't pick up on any major like wild nuclear miscommunications in there from that perspective.
Yes.
And from security side, I thought it was interesting. Like the most interesting for me was when they were breaking into the room, and the way they had to go through the door and that kind of stuff. And I was kind of like, there's a number of challenges in the way they portrayed that.
That's right. And the design decisions they made.
Yeah.
Imagine it as a castle, and there's inner and outer zones, and which zones have control over which other zones, which are the inner walls and the outer walls. That sort of, decision. And then the challenge of, if you've then got an insider in the most
in the most inner bit, what do you do now? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very true. So,
but the not wanting to acknowledge that there was a problem from the nuclear operator is definitely something that is seen in accidents, in real accidents.
Yes. So, absolutely right. That's right.
You're delusional. Talking about Dyatlov.
I'll say that again. Sorry. Someone said
it's from Chernobyl. There's a character who's like, "You're delusional, comrade," and then it turns out that they're not delusional and that actually the reactor's exploded.
That's fantastic. Oh, I got to see that. Is that worth seeing? I haven't seen Chernobyl.
It's really, really good.
Okay.
There's also a scene when they're like, they're looking at the radiation detectors and they're like, oh, it's like, 3 Röntgen, which is like not great, not terrible. And then they're like, but the readings only go up to 3 Röntgen. So there's no way that it's higher.
What a reassuring Geiger counter to have.
The Chernobyl incident, I haven't seen the film, but they were trained.
Welcome to the Soviet Union.
They were trained and told that the reactor could never fail in the way it did fail. They were always told that it would melt down into a safe state and it could never actually fail that way. And so it took them a long time to come around to the realization that there was actually something going wrong.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, we'll just leave it doing its thing. It's not a problem.
Hearing people say it'll never fail that way is just asking for Murphy's Law.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, if you guys all go out and when everyone does an appeal to authority or an appeal to confidence and you just laugh when you hear that, well, then this course has been a wonderful success in my point of view, if nothing else. But yeah.
There's also a great moment when they like go up to the party, because the party is obviously like the people who decide everything. So the engineers go to the party and they're like, we need to evacuate. And the party's like, no, the party will take it from here. The party knows what's right. And it's just like, that's fun.
Yes, that's right. And the thing that Oliver was talking about is sort of the dream of all safety systems. We want them to fail safe. When something goes wrong, we want it to be into a safe state. And if you have something that requires an active intervention, it's not as good. So with the, I know we're doing Apollo 13 in the tutes this week. I hope everyone's seen the film. And there's actually reading, if you're doing a Thursday or Friday tute, there's a bit of reading you can do too. You don't have to do it if you don't want, but I think it will help you. And if you did the Wednesday tute, you should still do it anyway, because it's interesting. But the 2 Apollo missions before that, and I assume all of the ones before that actually, but certainly 11 and 12, they'd been on a safety bearing, essentially. The orbit they were on when they went out would take them around the moon and then come back and they'd land back on the Earth. So if they didn't fire the engines even one more time, they would still do a safe re-entry. But this was the first time, because they wanted to move closer to the poles, that they'd moved off that safe orbit. So then it wasn't going to fail safe. If something went wrong, they actually needed to re-navigate to get back to an Earth orbit. Otherwise, they would miss Earth. So they didn't have that dream of fail safe. But what's the chance of something going wrong? Well, something went wrong. And it's really interesting how they recovered from that, by the way, because you'll do the reading, you'll find out. But really everything that could go wrong, a whole lot of little things that you wouldn't expect all went wrong at once, and they masked their ability to do anything. So even to get the calculations to come back, they couldn't take readings off the other stars because there was too much debris around, or debris. That Deborah, she's always around. Get out of the view screen. And so I think, am I right in thinking, someone who's read it more recently can remind me, I think they did the calculation. They had to do all these manual calculations to just fire bits of engines to re-get it back onto the right orbit, something you think is really space age and requires computers, but everything was down. I think they did it with manual calculations, and one of them had a watch, luckily. And in terms of lining... Yes.
Yeah, we actually talked about it in today's tute, because it involved like watching the horizon of the Earth and even drawing on the window as well.
Yes, it was inspired.
Wild.
They had no data at all, but they could see, they realized the line between night and day on the globe. And so they used that. That's like seat of the pants navigation. Fantastic. I can't remember why we're talking about this, but gee, it was, fail safe. So that what they weren't able to fail safe in that case. And of course, we always want things to fail safe. That's really good. And there is a good movie called Fail Safe that I nearly showed you and never did. And maybe we'll show it one day. It's really hard to get hold of, as hard as Colonel Blimp. It's got Henry Fonda in it, who was the guy from 12 Angry Men. And it is as amazing as Dr. Strangelove. And I think if you were there in the discussion about Dr. Strangelove at the end, they made this film around the same time as Dr. Strangelove, and it looked at the same potential craziness of the mutually assured destruction strategy that the Rand Corporation was encouraging the US to follow, and the Russia was following as well. So, and the Dr. Strangelove is a film everyone remembers. And even though it didn't perhaps at the time have such high star actors in it, though, since of course then we all love Peter Sellers, but the movie with Henry Fonda, which was the big serious movie and based on a book called Failsafe, which I've got, which is really interesting to read, is much more serious and worthy. But no one watches that or talks about that film because it didn't have the equivalent of Richard Feynman sticking the rubber thing in the water and grabbing everyone's attention. It didn't have humor. So Dr. Strangelove, which was funny, has remained interesting and has had more impact and change in the world probably in values than this very worthy film, Failsafe. But if I'll just tell you one idea about Failsafe because it was an amazing story. And this is in lieu of showing you the film. I wish I had shown you the film. But anyway, one year. Something's gone wrong. The US has accidentally destroyed a Russian city. It's about to be nuclear war, and the president says, I will destroy one of my own cities. And he bombs one of his own cities, or he intends to. And to show the Russians that it wasn't an attack or a sneaky thing, and to say we've both suffered, so let's not destroy the world. It's quite amazing. It's a very powerful idea. Sort of hinted at in Dr. Strangelove, which was also based on that book. Okay, so...
just a quick piece of trivia. I'm pretty sure Stanley Kubrick or the studio actually sued the guys that were making Failsafe, so it didn't come out at exactly the same time. Because they both knew they were making a movie about basically the same thing, and they were scared that it had Henry Fonda in it or whoever it was. And so the studio actually sued the guys that made Failsafe to delay its release.
That's very sad. Well, there you go. Thank you. That is an interesting piece of trivia. And Kubrick was a crazy guy, wasn't he? Crazy guy. Crazy in the sense of actually crazy, I suspect. Columbia. So, I mentioned that. Yeah, I don't have to go into any more details about that. All right. Now, I want to talk about this book, Normal Accidents. This is like a Bible to people that study safety. It's by Charles Perrault. It changed the way that everyone thought about accidents. Let me just read you a little bit. See if this sounds familiar. You stay at home from work or school because you've got an important job interview downtown this morning that you've finally negotiated. Your friend or spouse has already left when you make breakfast, but unfortunately he or she has left the glass coffee pot on the stove with the light on. The coffee is boiled dry and the glass pot has cracked. Coffee is an addiction for you, so you rummage around in the closet until you find an old drip coffee maker. Then you wait for the water to boil, watching the clock, and after a quick cup, dash out the door. When you get to your car, you find that in your haste, you've left your car keys and the apartment keys in the apartment. Well, that's okay, because there's a spare apartment key hidden in the hallway for such emergencies. I think we've talked about that. Never hide a key. That's okay, because there's a spare apartment key hidden in the hallway for such emergencies. This is a safety device, a redundancy, incidentally. But then you remember that you gave a friend the key the other night because he had some books to pick up, and planning ahead, you wouldn't be home when he came. That finishes that redundant pathway, as engineers call it. Well, it's getting late, but there's always the neighbour's car. The neighbour's a nice old gent who drives his car about once a month and keeps it in good condition. You knock on the door, your tail ready. But he tells you it just so happened the generator went out last week and a man is coming this afternoon to pick it up and fix it. Another backup system has failed you, this time through no connection with your behaviour at all. Uncoupled or independent events in this case, since the key and the generator are rarely connected. Well, there's always the bus, but not always. The nice old gent has been listening to the radio and tells you the threatened lockout of drivers by the bus company has indeed occurred. The drivers refuse to drive what they claim are unsafe buses and incidentally want more money as well. A safety system has foiled you, of all things. You call a cab from your neighbour's apartment, but none can be had because of the bus strike. The two events, the bus strike and the lack of cabs, are highly connected, dependent events or tightly coupled events, as we shall call them, since one triggers the other. You call the interviewer's secretary and say, is it just too crazy to explain, but all sorts of things have happened this morning and I can't make the interview with Mrs. Thompson. Can we reschedule it? And you say to yourself, next week I'm going to line up 2 cars and a cab and make the morning coffee myself. The secretary answers, sure, but says to himself, this person is obviously unreliable. Now, after this pushing for weeks for an interview with Thompson, they're not making it. He makes a note to that effect on the record and searches for the most inconvenient time imaginable for next week, one that Mr. Thompson might have to cancel. Now, I would like you to answer a brief questionnaire about this event. What was the primary cause of this accident? So we're doing here root cause analysis.
Being addicted to coffee.
Thank you. I'm going to give you a multiple choice thing, but definitely addicted to coffee is the root cause of most problems. But, you know, a very attractive root cause. Is it human error, such as leaving the heat on under the coffee or forgetting the keys in the rush? Yes, no, or unsure. Can you pick one of those three for number one?
No.
Write them down as you go. I'll do the whole multiple choice and then we'll do it at the end, how people have gone. Number two, is this mechanical failure? The generator on the neighbor's car? Yes, no, unsure. Is it the environment? The bus strike, the taxi overload? Yes, no, unsure. Is it the design of the system in which you can lock yourself out of an apartment rather than having to use a door key to set the lock? A lack of emergency capacity in the taxi fleet? Yes, no, unsure. Is it the procedures used, such as warming up the coffee in a glass pot, allowing only normal time to get out on this morning? Yes, no, unsure. So there are 5. If you answered yes to the first, human error, you're taking a stand on multiple failure accidents that resembles that of the President's Commission. Woohoo! That's what it was, to investigate the accident at 3 Mile Island. Oh, no, that was 3 Mile Island. Damn. The Commission blamed everyone, but primarily the operators. The builders of the equipment, Babcock and Wilcox, blamed only the operators. If you answered yes to the second choice, mechanical error, you can join the Metropolitan Edison officials who ran the 3 Mile Island plant. They said the accident was caused by the faulty valve and sued the vendor, Babcock and Wilcox. If you answered yes to the fourth, the design of the system, then you can join the experts of the Essex Corporation, who did the study for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the control room for the 3 Mile accidents. The best answer is not even all of the above. The best answer is rather none of the above. The cause of the accident is to be found in the complexity of the system. That is, each of the failures, the design, equipment, operators, procedures, or environment, was trivial by itself. Such failures are expected to occur since nothing is perfect, and we normally take little notice of them. The bus strike would not affect you if you had your car keys or the neighbour's car. The neighbour's generator failure would be little consequence if taxis were available. It was not an important appointment. The absence of cars, buses, and taxis would not matter. On any other morning, the broken coffee pot would have been an annoyance, an incident we'll call it, but would have not added to your anxiety and caused you to dash out without your keys. Although the failures were trivial in themselves, each one had a backup system or a redundant path to tread if the main one was blocked. The failures became serious when they interacted. It is the interaction of multiple failures that explains the accident. We expect bus strikes occasionally. We expect to forget our keys with that kind of apartment lock. Why else hide a redundant key? We occasionally loan the extra key to someone rather than disclose its hiding place. But what we don't expect is for all of these events to come together at once. That's why we told the secretary it was a crazy morning, too complex to explain, and invoked Murphy's laws to ourselves. If anything can go wrong, it will. This book here, he goes through accidents and he finds things called root causes. He works out, it talks about how to conduct root cause analysis. Now, root cause analysis is when you try and work out what really led to something happening. And you know, it's like a 7 why sort of thing. So someone says, oh, the Challenger disaster happened because it launched at too cold a temperature. Well, why did it launch at too cold a temperature? And then you could take 2 paths there. You could talk about why they decided to launch or why the temperature was too cold. Maybe you'd say, oh, because the O-rings used in the design fail at low temperature. Well, why were the O-rings used in the design? Oh, because, and you could just, so you just keep asking why. And you eventually cut through the surface things, which are irrelevant, random things that just will normally happen anyway. And you find the fundamental underlying cause. Now, health people do this a lot. So the Department of Health in New South Wales does it. And in London, they do it all the time. The London, whatever they call the Department of Health in London. In England, they do root cause analysis, which means they work out what is really going wrong that leads for something to happen. And the temptation, and what naive people will always do, and what politicians, I suspect, will always do, because the people understand it, the voters understand it, what newspapers will always do, and what storytellers will always do, and what movie makers will always do, is they will blame a human. They'll look for a scapegoat. But actually, that human was just part of a complex chain of things that happened. And any other human in that spot might have done exactly the same thing. They were just unlucky to be there that day. So the idea of normal accidents that he talks about in this book is in a complex system, in a system that's high risk, you expect accidents to happen. Accidents are normal, and you have to design your system so that even in the presence of normal accidents, everything works. And that is the design challenge we have. High-risk technologies. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing to think about is, do we have high-risk technologies in the world? Well, yeah, and growing all the time. In your lifetime, we'll probably have self-driving cars. We'll have spaceflight, commercial spaceflight for passengers probably. We'll have having to step outside in a world where there's been no vaccine ever discovered for COVID. As the world gets more and more complex and interconnected, and as we have a more and more global world, couplings between things get greater and greater. And the deadliness of couplings is when something goes wrong in one spot, it can cause unexpected things to go wrong in other spots. So for example, what's a great example of that? Oh yeah, at the moment in the coronavirus thing, let's start with Enron, just to move it away from now so it's clear what's right and wrong, and then let's move it into the slightly more contentious political environment we're in now. In Enron, when Enron was going under, and you might remember if you saw the film, the guy, I think it was Ken Lay, persuaded the fund that looked after people's superannuation, his employee superannuation, to invest in the company. The company's super scheme invested in the company. Why wouldn't you? The company's fantastic. It's making so much money. What a great thing for your retirement. But of course, the super scheme is there to look after you when you retire. It's like an insurance policy. The time you need it the most is if the company went belly up. But if it invests in the company, then at the time the company goes belly up, the thing you need the most also goes belly up. It's like, I think I told you back in 1987 when I was first dabbling with the share market, I got really nervous at the way all the prices were really high. And I was just thinking, this is crazy land. This is no good. And I took all my investments and I put them in listed property trusts, because I figured if the share market goes down, property will never go down. And a property trust is diversified. It's got you buy units, and the property trust buys lots of real property, and the units give you a share on lots of real property. It's actually like a CDO in a way. Crazy. But and then the crash happened, and I was sitting there so smug. I think it was October 87. And I was saying to everyone, I got out of the share market. I put everything in listed property trusts. And you know what happened? Listed property trust crashed too. Because I forgot, when people are depressed and frightened and scared, they don't have any faith in anything. And listed property trusts were shares in properties that contained the word share, if you say it like that. And they were abstract. And the value of something isn't its real value, it's what people will pay. And no one would pay anything for anything at that point. People were panicking. They just wanted to buy gold or rifles or toilet paper, things that, had immediate use to them. So I hadn't realized, but the financial system was far more tightly coupled. And what I thought was a backup strategy was actually no good. So this tight coupling leads to catastrophes. And we're seeing it now with lots of things in the world. As one thing goes, another thing goes. International trade goes, well, we've diversified. We talked about this in the sovereignty lecture, didn't we? So what I wanted to say about the current situation, though, is this. There's this policy being passed that I think is really, really bad, that people can withdraw money from their super if they need money, their superannuation. Now, superannuation is there so when you retire, you're not poverty-stricken. What could make you poverty-stricken when you retire? I don't know, a worldwide crash, losing your job early, the economy not going okay. The time you need your super more than any other time is after a situation like now. But people are using up their super now. That's crazy. It must look good to someone that that's happening. But that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And some people are being forced to do it because they have no alternative. But you can see the tight coupling here means the super is your backup system. It's the key under the mat. And you're lending it to your friend in the car at the very time you need it. Okay. A normal accident. Yeah, accident. He calls them normal accidents because he just wants to remove us from this world where we think these are unusual things, where I turn up late to the lecture and say, all these crazy things happen. What an unusual day. Curse that Murphy. Because actually that's completely normal. And actually I needed to allow for that and work around that. It's not satisfactory to talk about all these small things happening and saying what a problem it is, because it's.
Can I just ask a question on root cause analysis
course you can.
afterwards?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. Sorry for interrupting. I didn't know what I was going to ask.
At all, Brendan. Ask away.
Okay, cool. So, the fact that we can find a root cause to one thing interests me, because I know that we've been taught throughout this whole course that you can't just find one problem and be like, yes, this is it. So my question is it possible to have multiple root causes, or should they just be as general as it's the complexity of the system that's the problem?
No, that's such a great question. A general root cause is no good, because once you've found the root cause, you then want to carry out actions to bring about change. So yeah, you want them to be specific, and they will be multiple. Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's right. And then you have to do this tricky job of ranking them, because you can't solve every problem in the world. But yeah.
Oh, I'm glad we did case studies then.
So am I. Hey, by the way, what do you guys think of case studies? Can I just ask for some sort of thumbs up, thumbs down voting? Yes? Yes? Oh, that's awesome. Fantastic. Oh, Grub, you didn't like them? Oh, no, you did. Oh, you stuck your thumb on the screen. Aha! High tech. That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, because they're unusual. We do them in the course. And I'm trying to, we sort of, they happen in business all the time, but they don't normally happen in engineering. But I do think they're a good way, like running against the dinosaur lights, of getting you to walk in the shoes of the decision makers, and then so really making the decision and really changing your mind. I want to talk about 3 Mile Island now. And Oliver, you're probably much more of an expert on this than me. So 3 Mile Island was a nuclear disaster or incident that happened in America.
It was an accident.
Yeah.
Technically, it was level of accident, because there's a difference.
Yeah, tell me.
I wrote a blog on this as well, for the random, the media strike week. But yeah, there's like 7 rankings, 1 to 7, 7 being Chernobyl and Fukushima, although there's contention there. 5 was 3 Mile Island, and 1 is like, a bleep on the computer and nothing really happened. And the line between accident and incident is between 3 and 4.
Oh, fantastic!
So this is defined as an accident by the NEA, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I didn't even know that. It's a bit like DEF CON. Do they have do they name the levels? Like, do they say it's accident level 5 or something? Like
7 is major accident, 6 is serious accident, 5 is accident with wider consequences, 4 is accident with local consequences, 3 is serious incident, 2 is incident, 1 is anomaly.
It's a bit like the broken arrow, bent spear whole thing about nuclear accidents.
They're slightly more confusing, I must say.
How do you rank them? It's like it's on us. How would you rank how serious this accident was on a scale from stickleback to kingfisher? No,
yeah, the point of the rankings for nuclear incidents and accidents is to be able to articulate to the public, it's of this level of severity. There was this amount of comparative risk, because it's very difficult to explain the more literal risk.
Yeah, that's right. Risk explanation is very hard.
Can I jump in there, Richard?
Yeah, and then I have a question.
You mentioned like broken arrow and bent spear and whatnot. They're not designed as rankings, though. They're designed as classifications. I don't think they're intended, as I understand, I don't think they're intended to be like, this one is more serious than the other one. It's more about reporting exactly what happened.
Oh, I always put them in a ranking, but maybe that was wrong of me.
I think like there's certainly one like oh, we accidentally dropped a bomb and it exploded is certainly more important than like we don't know where one was. But I think that they're not intended to be severity categories. My reading was that they were just like descriptions of different possible events that could have happened.
Okay, I'm going to look into that, Tom. That's a really interesting reading, and I might have read into it what I wanted to see in it when I read it. Thank you very much. I was going to say something to Go on. Sorry, Oliver. But to everyone else's relief, because now we can move on with the exciting thing, because we're going to walk through the 3 Mile Island accident. And it's from the Normal Accident book. It's his first chapter, because it's what started him thinking about accidents. So I've got a picture of 3 Mile Island here. Am I sharing the screen already? Oh, yeah, I am. Cool. You've just been staring at that the whole time. That wasn't very good editing on my part, was it? All right. 3 Mile Island. Just wanted to go. Now, Oliver, you can correct us. And actually, I've just noticed this isn't such a good picture I put up. I put it up because it was a prettier picture, but actually it's missed a couple of bits. The accident started in the cooling system. There are 2 cooling systems. Oh, look, let me just talk about, actually, Oliver, why don't you tell everyone how a nuclear plant, this is like a...
Yeah, it's a boiling water reactor. Yeah. So the red and yellow bit is what's considered the nuclear zone. I don't think that's the right word, but that's one coolant loop, and that goes through the core and interacts directly with neutrons.
So it's then the water in there is, or whatever the liquid is radio.
It's water, yeah.
Well, sometimes it's salt, isn't it?
This reactor was a boiling water reactor. It was water. Yeah, you can have molten salt reactors. Chernobyl was a molten salt, I think. No, it wasn't. Sorry, no, it's
primary.
Yeah, primary coolant loop, and then the secondary coolant loop, which is what goes through the turbine, etc., is colored blue and yellow, and that's a separate loop that is not radioactive. It does not have any interaction with radioactive material, and that is where the initial issue started.
I'm as you're talking indicating everything with the mouse, but I've suddenly realized maybe I'm not showing my mouse position.
No, we can see a mouse.
Okay. Yeah, so go on. So yes, that's right. That's where it started here, didn't it? So the idea being, we've got all this nuclear energy. It's good energy. We want electricity. That's another form of energy. If only we could go straight from this nuclear energy to electricity, if there was some sort of transducer that did that, but we don't know how to do that. But we do know that this sort of energy, like the old light bulbs, generates a lot of heat. And why don't we just capture that heat and make some really, 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 really hot water and steam even, and use that like a steam engine to drive turbines to generate electricity. So it's like a really old coal-fired thing, except it's nuclear-fired. And the problem being, and Oliver, correct me because I'm sure I'll get this wrong, that we have all this heat here and we want to drive the turbine, but the heat has to move through the reactor core where there are all these rods of reactive material and it's going to get all radioactive. And we don't want our turbines and everything getting all radioactive because that's a real pain to maintain and look after them. You want to keep the radioactivity contained. So what we do is we have this loop completely closed, and then we have this second loop over here that cools down that loop and takes the heat away from it. And this is of clean, pure water that's not radioactive, and that drives through the turbines and things. And the turbine's just a spinny wheel that makes a magnet rotate, presumably, or a copper coil or something like that. Is that...
Yeah. The water's not particularly radioactive compared to everything else, like compared to the control rods and the fission products, but there is some radioactivity, so it's classed separately. And like there's also part of the point of the separation is for containment, and that's the one thing in 3 Mile Island that worked, was the containment. And you can see the big concrete structure around it was breached in one particular point intentionally, but I don't know if you want to go into that.
So this is, the idea is we make this big concrete coffin around the whole damn thing, really. And if anything goes wrong, well, it's happening inside this big concrete thing. And I hadn't realized that before, Oliver. So the separation is really so we can have containment. So really it is, they're trying to decouple and they're trying to have cohesion.
Yeah, it also is much more helpful for maintenance, as you were saying, and just, what's it called? When you get like decommissioning, because you can use the turbine and the generator in any civilian application if it's a separated system. Whereas if it's combined, then it's very much more difficult to use that again later because the exposure.
Okay, so the consequence of having to have 2 systems is we've got a bit more complexity here, complexity being bad, and we've got a bit of coupling. You can see the 2 systems interact in some way. And Oliver, do you want to just talk about how do you remember the steps that it went through?
Yeah, I'll try and do it pretty quick. So basically, they were doing some maintenance on basically the water purifier, and they had turned off the emergency feed water line into the secondary coolant loop. That was against the NRC.
Right. I just realized this diagram doesn't have any of that. It should be here somewhere.
Yeah, the diagram I have is the same. It's basically, yeah, it's in the secondary loop, but it's not particularly important where it is. It's just a way to get new water in should there be something wrong with the existing water, a leak somewhere else or something.
I think there were 2 valves and they turned them both off during routine maintenance or something and forgot to turn them back on.
Yeah, and that was the only thing in the whole incident that they did that was against the NRC, the American Nuclear Authority guidelines. And basically what happened was when they were doing the cleaning, they somehow managed to get some water into an air feed line for the condenser, which is a problem. And the condenser stopped working, which in turn stopped the pump working, which in turn stopped the turbine working. So basically at that point, you have no water flowing in the secondary loop.
Yeah. And I understand it was it was actually a safety system. So the water got into some sort of hydraulic sensing system and it interpreted that in there as meaning something had failed and shut down the system.
I don't know.
And so anyway, this water stopped being pumped and it wasn't going around.
And usually that wouldn't be an issue because this backup feed line would just force water through it. But because they'd closed that valve, obviously, that's a problem.
And that's right. And they thought it was working because if I remember right, the signal to activate the pump was sent and the control board only indicated if the signal was sent or not. It wasn't actually.
Yeah, that was a bit further on. Within 3 seconds of the condenser tripping, the pressure release valve in the main loop is opened due to an increase in pressure, due to an increase in temperature. The water is usually at 15.5 megapascals and like 350 degrees. And the pressure relief valve was opened due to that pressure increase. And that was what the sensor failed on. Was reclosing that valve later.
Okay. That's right. Yeah. That's right. The signal was sent to close it. So
yeah, and so within 8 seconds, the reactor scrams.
Yes.
Turns off.
So the idea is this stuff here, the secondary loop, keeps cooling down the water in the primary loop, so everything's happy. But if this system ever shuts down and the emergency backup system doesn't turn on for some reason, there's nothing to cool this water down. It just gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and pressure builds up and up and up and up. And you don't want an explosion. So there's this relief valve that you can open to let the pressure out. This is suspiciously similar to the China syndrome, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the crazy thing is that the China syndrome was released 12 days before this incident.
Yes, it's too. So the valve opens. It's this automatic device. It's an automatic safety device. And we'll talk a bit about automatic safety devices. But the idea is they pull a human out of the loop. So if something's going wrong, an automatic system steps in and makes the right thing happen.
It's also too fast. It was within 3 seconds of the issue.
Why was that?
Well, it's because of just how much heat's being generated. So it's like a 3 gigawatt thermal plant. So there is a silly amount of heat going through this system. And it was just too fast. Like an operator couldn't react that fast. And the whole thing was scrammed automatically within 8 seconds. So it went from 3 gigawatt to, I did some basic math and figured out it was like 200 megawatt, which is still a crazy amount of energy. But this is thermal, not electrical. But yeah, so went down to 7% of operating power. But
so now scramming, remind me of this, the control, some rods drop down.
Yeah, exactly.
In the reaction, is that right?
Yeah, so the control rods go in and there's no more fission happening. It's just the decay of the fission products, which are already there, and that's natural. That's just how it works.
And it's called scramming when that happens because you're supposed to just run like buggery when that happens.
There's a funny name it comes from. In the very original pile reactor, they had these held up with a string, and the guy had an axe, and he actually had to chop the string to make it stop. So there's some tie with that, but I can't remember the acronym anymore.
Okay.
It's not important. But
so the rods drop in, they realize something's going wrong, and they slow it down, but it's still generating heat, much less, but still generating it. And this guy here, this valve, emergency valve, which no one has any control over, pops open and starts releasing. And there's a problem with it that it fails to shut when it gets the shut-off signal. But the control panel registered that the shut-off signal's been sent. So as far as everyone there knows, it has shut. And I'm remembering now something about here. I think the emergency pump thing here, I think there were 2 indicators that would indicate if water was flowing. But no one was looking to see if they were showing because everyone was expecting it was flowing. And I think one of them was obscured by a maintenance tag. So they'd done some maintenance work on something above and left a tag hanging down below it. And I'm pretty sure in the China syndrome, I saw a maintenance tag on the control board that was obscuring something.
Yeah, I don't know about the maintenance tag in this one, but there definitely was in China syndrome. But the bigger issue was that because there's just so many sensors going on, and the way they laid out the control room is that stuff that is not safety critical is put like to the side, so it's just much more difficult to see.
Yeah.
And they were quite small, confined control rooms. So you had to get up from your station and walk around to look at it. And so just within 8 seconds, why would it occur to you to look at it?
Yeah.
Until the big red lights come on saying the reactor's been scrammed. And for those who watch China Syndrome, I think it's much like that process. Yeah.
That's right. And now with this valve open, it's just jetting out all the high pressure. And I think that's breaching inside here. It's still inside the containment area, isn't it? But it's inside.
Yeah, it vents into this pressure relief tank, which is designed to accommodate the pressure expulsion.
So, but it doesn't shut down when the pressure is restored to a safe level. So water keeps boiling out of this system. Now there's a problem. If the water level gets too low, even though the control rods are in there, without water there, or if it's bubbling too much and you get cavitation, so little bubbles of gas and things starting to fall around the rods, I believe that the dampening effect is reduced and you can actually start a reaction again. Is that right?
Didn't occur in this situation. It was simply that's what happened. That's what happened in Chernobyl. Yeah. They had a negative feedback loop, a positive feedback loop because of the way the reactor was designed. That's not the case in this reactor. It was just that once all the water's boiled off, there's nowhere for the energy to go. It just starts melting stuff, and that's ultimately what happened.
Okay, so the interesting thing about this, so there was this whole chain, and if you read the Normal Accidents book, and I don't know, do you guys study this, Oliver, in nuclear energy engineering?
This particular, we had a lecture on this, and I posted a blog that I went through the step-by-step of what happened, and then also some of the learnings from it. So I'll just post my link to my blog if you want in the
that would
chat.
Be awesome.
But I have a picture like this in there. So.
Fantastic. So I wonder if you guys do Charles Perrow, but I'm pretty sure you would actually.
Charles Perrow? I don't think so. Not that particular one.
Yeah, I reckon eventually you might, because I think he's the Mr. Big of Act. And he got his claim to fame with his analysis of the 3 Mile Island one. And it is well worth everyone reading because it turns out that although they tried to blame, you heard at the beginning, they tried to blame operator error on the valves not being open. Other people tried to blame mechanical error on the valve, the pressure relief valve not working. It's allowed to not work one time in 50 or something, which seems remarkably low to me, but apparently they failed to work at a far worse rate than that. So everyone's blaming other people, but actually the whole system, Charles Perrow eventually argues, is a dangerous design. You know, the whole idea of how it's made, it was dangerous. I think there were things in the control room that sometimes the light is on or green if it's good, and sometimes the light is on or green if it's open, like whether it indicates good or open. And sometimes you want it to be closed, so there's supposed to be some green lights and some red lights, or some on lights or some off lights or something like that. So just the psychology of the whole thing wasn't very good. You couldn't just glance at this board and work out what the heck was going on and what was important. And
the crazy thing with the relief valve was that at another reactor, that had exactly the same issue.
Yes.
But it was operating at 3% power when the issue occurred. So basically the reactor was already cold enough that nothing happened.
Yes,
but they never told anyone else that they had this issue.
Yes.
And so it didn't occur to the operators to check this valve. And about 14 minutes later, a new group come in and they noticed this is the valve and they closed it, but by then it was too late. And that was one of the best things that happened, was that the new group came in and said, everyone else go away. We don't want to talk to you. We want to look at this with a fresh set of eyes.
Yes. That was the concluding point that I think is the most interesting thing for me as well, that once everyone had formed a mental model about what was going on, they just couldn't see the problem. They couldn't see that the pressure relief valve must still be open. They had formed these theories, and although the evidence was in front of them confounding the theories, they weren't able to change their plan or their model of what's going on. But when a new crew came in, they worked it out almost straight away because they had fresh eyes. And that is a lesson for everyone. Oliver, thank you. That's fantastic. We're so lucky to have you in the course. May you go out and be both safe and secure. and bring that to our nuclear world. The last book that I wanted to talk about, and we're good because we're nearly out of time, is Just Culture by Sidney Dekker. So I won't read any extracts from the book because we're tight on time. This is the guy I mentioned on Monday who's thinking about accidents. So he's following on from the work of James Reason and Perot, who are viewing accidents not as anomalies, but as normal things that you can expect to happen in any complex system. He started looking at blame and culture. So he started thinking, okay, if we can actually find out the root causes, if we can actually work out what the problem is, how can we change it so that this doesn't happen anymore? And his particular interest was in airplane safety, and Just Culture was picked up by lots of airlines around the world, and in particular Qantas, and it made this incredible difference to their accident rate. So they are so passionate about it at Qantas. If you go there and talk about Dekker, they just think he's amazing. And now they follow his principles, and because it made measurable, they're numbers driven, made massive measurable differences to them. So let me summarize his approach because it's a bit weird. And I remember once I was talking about it to someone and they said, doesn't everyone think he's wishy-washy and hopeless? Sidney Dekker? And I was thinking, I don't. I think he's fantastic. But you could see why some people might not like it, because really he's trying to change how people think about things. What he's saying is that, let me tell you the story the Qantas engineers told me. They used to have this thing called the curse of the last touch. So if a plane took off and there was some problem with something, and they landed and found there'd been some problem, a valve hadn't been shut when it was supposed to be shut, or something had been over-tightened, or something had been left open, or whoever. The person that signed off on the sheet saying everything was okay got in massive trouble. Ended their career, was whatever. And the engineer said, it was this crusty old guy who was talking to me, he said, the weird thing was we started losing all our best engineers. They started being kicked out because they were the last to touch and they'd signed off the form. They're the last person involved in the accident or incident. And because they'd signed off on the form, they got all the blame. They were scapegoated and they got in big trouble. And he said, but actually the sort of people that sign off on forms and do that are the sort of people that get their hands dirty, that jump in, that are always helping, the people that are in senior positions, so they are in a power to be able to sign it off, our best, wisest, safest guys. And it was counterproductive. It was weird. And he said the other thing that they had, and lots of organizations still do had, was a sort of a blame culture. So when something went wrong, what they would rush around doing is looking for someone to blame and saying that person was at fault. And we talked about that in the End of the China Syndrome. And if you've seen the film, you'll remember when the old guy says, when he's a bit unnerved after the investigation, the first time he speaks in front of the commission or energy agency or whoever it was who was doing the inquiry. And he says to the guy, where do you think the axe of human error is going to fall? Not you, you're college educated. You're from the Navy or the Air Force or something. It's me, I'm uneducated. I've got no background. I'm going to get hit with the axe of human error, he called it. And that's this great phrase. I keep thinking about it, the axe of human error. It's going to fall down and chop off someone's head. And he could see he was the scapegoat for it. And we've seen this, I guess, with whistleblowers and lots of things. People like scapegoating, and the person that did the last touch, even if they're your best person, they'll get the axe. So the idea of just culture is saying, when a plane takes off, say, with a screw left off or a bolt untightened or a pair of pliers still inside the wheel casing that was used to tighten something in the wheel casing. When something like that happens, it's not the fault of the last person who is looking after it and checking it. It is the fault of the whole organization, of the whole culture, of how we got here, of the way we do things. It is a fundamental thing, and this person is an innocent victim just like everyone else is. And the mistake they're making, anyone could make, and it's unfair to pick on them for it. And instead of having a culture of blame and punishment, we should have a culture which is a fair and just culture. And there's a little phrase, did I put it down there? Where is it? I didn't write it. I'm just going to read from the back of the book. I hope this isn't going to be a quote from him. A just culture protects people's honest mistakes from being seen as culpable. But what is an honest mistake? Or rather, When is a mistake no longer honest? It is too simple to assert that there should be consequences for those that cross the line. Lines just don't exist out there, ready to be crossed or obeyed. We people construct the lines, and we draw them differently all the time, depending on the language we use to describe the mistake, on hindsight, history, tradition, and a host of other factors. What matters is not where the line goes, but who gets to draw it. If we leave that to chance or to prosecutors, or fail to tell operators honestly about who may end up drawing the line, then a just culture can be very difficult to achieve. The absence of a just culture in an organization, in a country, in an industry hurts both justice and safety. Responses to incidents and accidents that are seen as unjust can impede safety investigations, promote fear rather than mindfulness in people who do safety critical work, make organizations more bureaucratical rather than more careful, and cultivate professional secrecy, evasion, and self-protection. A just culture is critical for the creation of a safety culture. Without reporting failures and problems, without openness and information sharing, a safety culture cannot flourish. And this is exactly the thing, for example, that I've been talking about, if you've been seeing me prattling on about it, with the contact tracing app. If the government continues to criminalize certain actions to do with COVID, like if you can get massive fines or you can get life imprisonment for being involved in someone being infected, or you can get fined for meeting the wrong number of people for the wrong reason at the wrong time and things like that, then what people will do is they won't want to use a contact tracing app because it's incriminating them. It's gathering evidence against them. If you're in a place of blame and punishment, your natural thing is to try and protect yourself. And here everyone would be hurt by that, because if it's not in your interest to carry the app around with you, then we won't be able to do contact tracing. So it's very important to have a just culture even when it applies to COVID. So the idea we have here is, rather than blaming individuals, what Qantas does now is when something goes wrong, they do a root cause analysis, they work out the fundamental systems that were wrong, and then they try and fix the system. And the person that reports the problem, that was the last touch, that caused the problem, are not sacked or blamed, but everyone understands and everyone is compassionate and everyone tries their best. And now, instead of when something going wrong, people ducking for cover, or trying to hide or obscure it or be evasive or lie, now people come forward proudly and quickly point out problems and announce them as soon as physically possible. Instead of when you realize you've left your pair of pliers in the wheel casing, instead of just hoping, because 99% of the time it'll be fine, it'll just fall out when the wheel opens at the other end and no one will ever notice. Instead of doing that, you actually report it straight away. Shit, I just remembered I left my pliers in the wheel casing. And now everyone can make sensible decisions and careful planning can be done. And maybe that plane does different things before it lands. I saw the Qantas toolkits, by the way. Once they realized that leaving tools after doing maintenance in critical areas could cause damage, they got these custom-made toolboxes. They're so beautiful. And every tool has a little special spot when it goes. And if the tool's not in the spot, it's really visible. So it sort of fails safe. You can just, before you close the toolbox, you look at it and you can see if everything's there or if there's the tiniest thing missing. So the idea is, let's create a culture. Let's create systems to fix the problems we notice are the root causes of accidents. Let's encourage people to report accidents. Let's encourage people to report problems, and let's do the best we can to fix them. And let's notice that a system of vicious punishment and seeking blame will actually encourage people, just like my students used to be encouraged to not do good unit tests, will actually encourage people to not have a safety culture. So this book I found amazing. It was recommended to me by some pilots and some test pilots who think it's fantastic. I read it. I couldn't believe it. I went to Qantas. I got to be an engineer for a day. It was so awesome. Of course, I couldn't do anything that would affect safety, but I pretended I was an engineer. I walked around with engineers and it was so cool. And I just asked them about safety culture the whole time. And I was so impressed by the level of commitment to safety by every single person in the organization. They were so obsessed with being safe. So that scene in Rain Man, when we learned that Qantas is the safest airline in the world. Well, this is not me. I have no connection with Qantas whatsoever. But ever since doing that, I've tried to always fly Qantas. I tried to never fly anyone else because I cannot think of us. I just want those people to be looking after my safety, even though, damn it, it costs me more money. And probably after Virgin disappears, it'll cost me even more money. I'm always going to fly Qantas because I just think those guys are legends. So safety culture, please learn about it. Just culture, please read the book. It's very important to know about. And notice it's about bringing about culture change. And that's the last thing I'm going to say. And I'm hoping I've still got seconds. No, I've got negative 60 seconds. Can I read one last little bit and then we're done? If you have to go, go, and you can watch the video later on. How do we change culture? This is the thing. Once we've identified problems, once we've noticed how we should respond to problems, once we've understood that problems are normal and completely to be understood, once we've understood the systemic problems of coupling and various other dimensions that are discussed in great detail in Charles Perrow and Human Error book by James Reason, here's one of James Reason's popular books, and I love it because of the title. He wrote it near the end of his career, A Life in Error. He's reflecting back over his life. And here's a little summary on page 85. 84. What makes a safe culture? According to Carl Wick, the power of a safe culture lies in instilling collective mindfulness in the many entities that can penetrate, disable, or bypass the system's safeguards. This is no easy task in industries with relatively few accidents, and you can see why. Few accidents, no detecting if you're doing it, and no belief that it's really bad to do. Wick defines reliability as a dynamic non-event. Safety, as opposed to unsafety, is invisible in the sense that uneventful outcomes do not attract attention. So it's just like risk. I am now going to talk about the levels of culture change. So here's an organization. Here are the levels it can go through on the road to attaining safer culture. Level number 1, don't accept the need for change. The system managers are happy with the status quo. They do not believe they have a safety problem. They are satisfied with the ways they are achieving their cost-saving and efficiency targets. Level number 2, they accept the need for change, but they don't know where to go. There's concern over a series of bad events. There's unwelcome media comment. Existing safety measures are recognized as inadequate, but cultural deficiencies are not understood or appreciated. So they're not yet seeing it as a cultural problem. They're just seeing it as, oh, we need to fix valves. We need to get better pressure safety release valves. We need to not put tags on this. You know, it's the swatting at a fly thing that we talked about. Did I talk about that at the beginning? Now, this primitive idea of, you know, the Roman idea that he hits you here, you swat. Did I talk about that? Responsive reactiveness? No, I should talk about that if I haven't. I'll talk about that in the last lecture. Because I think quotes from antiquity are very important in a security course. No, they know, level 3, they know where to go, but they don't know how to get there. They acknowledge the existing safeguards are less than adequate. They recognize that organizational culture is not conducive to safer operations, but they're unsure how to make necessary improvements. 4, they know how to get there, but they doubt whether the organization can afford it. Current projects are running over budgets. There's high turnover of skilled labor. There's shortage of key staff. 5, they make the changes, but they only do them cosmetically. They take shortcuts. They fail to validate the process. They fail to monitor progress. That's probably, 6, they make changes, but no good comes of them. The model for the changed organization does not align with the real world. 7, the model aligns today, but not tomorrow. The change achieves only limited benefits due to unforeseen or unappreciated changes in the external world. And 8, successful transition. The changed organization keeps in step with a dynamic world and brings sustained benefit. And he talks about how to bring about culture change, but I won't do that because this is too short a lecture. And bring about culture change is the hardest problem in the universe and well worth you thinking about. It's even harder than changing your own mind, is changing the mind collectively of a culture. But you can and have to do it. That is the summary of safety. Thank you very much, everyone. We only have one lecture left, which is next Monday, where we're doing a catch-up for the Easter week. We'll do a summary. We'll talk a little bit about the future. There's a couple of fun things I want to show you, and we'll answer questions. We'll do a course survey at the end. I think Lisa's starting to send surveys around already. Is that right? Please, everyone, fill them in if you can. I know there's an online one for the uni, and by all means, fill that in. The uni uses that for its own purposes. That's a great thing to do. But what helps me more than anything in the whole universe is if you fill the individual one in that we send around to you and give us concrete suggestions about what worked and what didn't, and make recommendations for improvement, because everything that in this course that you like has no doubt arisen from suggestions made by students in previous years. And all the stupid things you haven't had to put up with have been because they've told me about them and I've stopped doing them. And the new ones I've started doing this time, if you tell me, I'll make sure I don't impose them on other people next time. So please, I would appreciate it utterly. We spend so much time reading every word you say. So please try and do both of those ones, the one for the uni and the one for us. The last thing I wanted to say was the final exam, which we'll also talk about in the last lecture, not now. I like having a revision lecture where anyone can ask any questions about anything and we can go over stuff and you can just ask anything you want. I was thinking a good time for it might be, if you wanted, in this time next week in our normal lecture time, because maybe that fits in with your life. What would you think of that? Or would you like to have it later and closer to the actual exam? Can everyone just unmute their mics and say, yes, if you'd like it next Wednesday.
Sorry, what was it?
Ah,
Sorry, what was it?
Yeah.
Why not have both?
Why not both? I'm going to ask you if you want Wednesday or another time. So next Wednesday, I'll run a lecture in the normal lecture time, which is just a Q&A, and I'll tell you about the exam, and I'll ask any questions about anything, and I'll revise any topics you want revised, and I'll just give you general reassurance that you don't have to stress about the exam. So it's a really important thing to come along to. It's not compulsory, of course, and we'll record it, so you don't have to watch it. But I'm thinking, is next Wednesday too soon, or is that a good time? It's very convenient, I'm just thinking, because that's when everyone's used to coming. So the vote,
Is it feasible for both?
can we run it twice? Possible, but normally we solve everything the first time we run it.
Okay.
But if you run it the first time and there's still more questions, I'm happy to run another one. Yeah, I'm happy to run as many as you guys need. But if the first one's good enough, then it's sort of almost better to just do one. Otherwise, it can get a bit depressing the day before the exam when you suddenly realize you've got to watch 18 hours of revision lectures.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm very happy to chat at any other time about anything. But so just going to do a quick vote. Unmute your mics and say Wednesday really loudly if you want Wednesday. And then in a second, I'll ask you to unmute your mics and say not Wednesday if you want another day. So let's try the Wednesday ones first. 1, 2, 3.
Wednesday.
Okay. And then I'll go 1, 2, 3 and vote for, if only they had some sort of polling software. Someone should write something like that.
You can actually do yes and no under participants.
I didn't realize that. What an idiot. Here we go.
This one was way more fun though.
Yeah, let's do the other one. Let's just say not Wednesday, but thank you, Callum. You're spot on, and I am an idiot. Not Wednesday. 1, 2, 3.
Not Wednesday.
Not Wednesday.
Not Wednesday.
There's a few. Brian, Luan.
It was both.
Oh, it's for both. What, Brian? What is Wednesday no good for you?
Yeah, I think it'd be better for me if it was closer to the exam date, just for my personal reasons.
What date is the exam? Is it the Saturday?
It's the 9th.
Saturday, 9th of May.
So we could also do it the Monday, 1 week after next week. But I'm just nervous that might be in the middle.
People actually have exams then, though.
Yeah, I'm just nervous.
Okay.
Not having
that's fine. But that's one person. So
Ryan, if it doesn't work for you and the video's no good, contact me and we'll do something else.
Okay.
You can always do it. There's no not making an irrevocable decision here. How about you, Luan? Is that all right? Just push down the space bar or nod.
Yes, it will be fine.
Thank you very much. Okay, everyone. Sorry we went over again and we started late. All these little things happen. Who would have known? It's very nice to see you all. I look forward to seeing you all on Monday.
Richard?
Yeah, Lisa?
Yep, we have the movie starting at 7:15.
Oh, I forgot all about the movie.
Oh, how could you?
So there's a different URL. It's on the schedule page of Open Learning. Yes. I'll put it in the chat again now. And everyone, we're going to start at 7:15.
Yes. So, and the mechanics are, if you want to, this is Hackers, the best. Well, I mean, it's a silly movie, but it's very fun. Angelina Jolie's breakthrough performance. And it has lots of funny quotes in it that we'll have to keep using from now on. How we're going to do it is there's a free, you can watch it for free on the link that's on the schedule that Lisa's just shared. So open that in one window. I'm going to close this and exit this discussion. So we've finished the recording, and then I'm going to come straight back in. So you can use the same link for the Zoom session. And then everyone that wants to watch it, come back in and we'll do a countdown 1 or 3, 2, 1. And when everyone's set up and ready to go, we'll watch it in synchrony. And at the end of the lecture, I'll come back to the Zoom session, which we'll have left running the whole time, though no one.
No, different Zoom session.
Oh, we're not using the same Zoom session.
No.
Oh, okay. Why is that, Lisa? Just to stop confusion.
That's what we worked out with the Security Society. So
okay. Oh, and they know the. All right. So Lisa shared the Zoom link. So leave this Zoom, join that Zoom, follow the link in the schedule to load the thing up. It's free, but don't start playing it yet. And in about 15 minutes or less, 5 minutes maybe even, we'll all start watching it together if you want to watch it. And otherwise, I'll see you on Monday.
Cool.
Yeah. See you all.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, Richard.
See you.
Thanks, Richard.
Bye, Richard.
Bye, Richard. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you guys soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
See ya.
Lovely hearing you. See you, Anushka, Sage. Alana, Shrimp, Matthew,
Bye.
Nathan, Michael, Morgan, Robert, Evan, Alan, James, Naeem, Sai, Brendan, Tom, Gus, A, Michael, and Naeem. I think that's everyone. Okay. Oh, someone raised their hand. Did someone want to say something? Bye. See you, Rui. Bye all. See you, Lisa. How do I finish?